Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian at Air Force Association headquarters, which is our home as well, to talk to the president of the Air Force Association, retired Air Force General Larry Spencer. Sir, thanks for taking some time to meet with us.
Good morning. I'm happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
Obviously, AFA winter is coming up in sunny Orlando, although given the weather here, you could wonder why we're all going to go down to Florida for this great gathering of airmen. Senior officers from across the force are going to be there. PACAF will be there. USAF Commander will be there, as well as many others, as well as General Goldfein and the entire leadership. The new Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force will be down there as well. Talk to us a little bit about what this year's theme is for the conference.
Well, this year's theme is data fusion and command and control. Really exciting. We'll have about 1,600 people, about 38 or so exhibitors. Really looking forward to a great time. It's going to be a really great event. A couple of significant things. First is the Air Force 70th birthday this year. We'll also be celebrating some of the 100th anniversaries of some of our squadrons. We will have some few unique things. For example, this will be the last AFA event for General Hawk Carlisle down in Air Combat Command, so we hate to see him go, but we'll celebrate him leaving the Air Force. We will have Acting Secretary Disbrow there, so this will be her first time addressing the audience. We'll also have our brand new Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Chief Wright, will speak as well. So a great agenda of activities, great speakers, looking forward to a great time.
Let me ask you, obviously you were Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force. You were Vice Chief at a very, very important time with financial turmoil, basically, that you and the Air Force faced. You have a very, very strong background in trying to make sure that the numbers all work out right. As you look at, it looks like there will be some more money now. We're not sure how much more money it's going to be, but there is this sense that there's going to be more money for each of the services. What should the priorities be for the Air Force now if it's going to get a little bit extra money? And how are you going to be supporting the Air Force in that mission of trying to get that more money to address some of those pressing shortfalls?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, you're right. I spent most of my career trying to figure out what to cut, so I've never had the pleasure of figuring out what to buy. But when you think about the Air Force, that's a real challenge because the Air Force, because it's so diverse, and because the fleet is so old, and because the Air Force needs more people, there are so many things the Air Force needs to buy that I'm not sure that anyone could fund it all. So it will be a challenge for the Air Force to prioritize what they think is most important. If you just think about a few things, I mean, they're buying a new fighter, they're buying a new bomber, they're buying a new tanker. That's not to mention they need a new trainer, TX, J-Stars. You go down the line, they need 350,000 people to grow to 350,000 people. So there's so many things the Air Force needs to get their people, training, readiness, and equipment up to where it needs to be. It's going to be quite a challenge articulating all of that and putting that into a package that hopefully they'll get money for. The Air Force Association will play a big role in that. We'll be on the Hill. We'll be in support. We understand what the Air Force needs are. Our mission is to promote a dominant Air Force. So we will be shoulder to shoulder with the Air Force, articulating the needs of the Air Force and working with folks on the Hill to make sure they understand why it's so important to have a dominant Air Force.
We've been working with you a little bit on your Airmen for Life campaign. Obviously, that's one of your most important priorities. Tell us a little bit about Airmen for Life and why you think it's so important.
Yeah, Airmen for Life, it's really pretty simple, and I'll use myself as an example. I enlisted right out of high school, was 18 years old. Didn't know a lot about the Air Force, so I came in, and for the first couple of years, I sort of felt like, okay, I'm in the Air Force. But the more I stayed in the Air Force, the more I got to understand what the Air Force was about integrity, about dominance, about lethality. The more I stayed in the Air Force, I was no longer in the Air Force was in me. And so the Air Force Association is an organization that allows everyone, whether you're active duty or retired, to be an airman for life. And so I now, as a retiree, continue to serve the Air Force as an airman. And that's really the Airman for Life concept, that once an airman, always an airman.
That is something that the other services have sort of understood before the Air Force, right? I mean, if you're a Marine for life. You're never, if you ever say ex-Marine, that's not true. You're just a former Marine,
right,
because you're still a Marine. A Marine will wake up in the middle of the night to go help another Marine. how tough, you are an airman literally for life.
Right.
You were 18 years old. It was 1971 when you joined a very, very different Air Force, which I
Right.
want to ask you about.
Right.
But, how hard is it to instill that sort of sense sometimes? Because people will sometimes be surprised that somebody speaks up and says, oh, well, I spent an entire career in the Air Force, and people go, wow, I didn't know Bob was in the Air Force even. What are some of the things that even the active duty and the chief maybe has to focus on to sort of inculcate this sort of culture that maybe the other services have a little bit more than the Air Force has had?
Yeah, I don't know that the other services have it more than the Air Force. I think we may have articulated it differently. I think the chief has already started this. He's focusing on the squadron, as you know. He's sort of going back to basics, back to where, the tip of the spear, if you will, and sort of building from the ground up. And I think that's the start of this culture, if you will, that once an airman, always an airman. You're right. If you're walking through the airport and there's a Marine there, a former Marine, at some point during the conversation, that will come out. To be honest with you, I'm starting to hear more and more. If I have a conversation with someone I meet on the street, if they were in the Air Force, it's starting to come out. So I think that's starting to build, and I'm really excited about that. So we're happy in AFA to sort of push this idea of Airmen for Life, and it's taken on, and we really hope to continue to build it.
You joined, we were at the tail end of Black History Month. You were one of the senior-most black officers in the United States military. What was the Air Force like that you joined in 1971 compared to the Air Force that you ended up leading in the late, 2011, the late 20 teens?
Wow, yeah, the Air Force in 1971 when I came in is quite different than it is today. A lot of it is because our society was different and the environment was different. If you recall, probably not old enough to recall, but if you read, it was in the middle of the civil rights movement, really engaged in Vietnam, anti-Vietnam protests. There were just a lot of things going on, race riots, a lot of racial tension even on bases. Back then, it was mandatory in the Air Force. You had to attend what they call race relations courses. So things were a lot different back then racially. Things have certainly improved quite a bit since then. Just to give you a perspective, when I joined the Air Force, there had not been one African American 4-star, not one. And so things have changed quite a bit since then. And the Air Force is a better place for it. So whereas things are different, things are improved, I still think we have a lot more work to do. But I was so proud to be in the Air Force, so proud to serve, and I wouldn't have it any other way, and I wouldn't want to be a part of any other organization.
Were there any times in your career, or in that early period, that you were like, wow? I mean, I've talked to friends of mine from that era, some of whom did experience some very, very negative things, some of whom didn't experience negative things, some of whom who came from the South and said this was very par for the course, whereas others who were from the North were like, wow, that's, David Dinkins tells some amazing stories, former mayor of New York, he was one of the Montford Point Marines, was a real honor to interview him many years ago, where he said, coming from New York, New Jersey, it wasn't until we got to Washington, D.C. that I was jarred by the language, getting into the separate car, and what were some of the experiences that you had that you thought, wow, this is America, but we need to see some change?
Sure, I'll give you an example. When I first joined the Air Force, I was stationed in a base in the South, and I grew up athletically and playing football, so I was on the intramural football team, and we were getting killed. To be blunt, the team was really killing us, and they had a really good defensive line. And it got so intense that we were in a huddle, and one of my teammates yelled out, and obviously subconsciously, he was thinking this, but he didn't really mean to say it. But he said, would somebody stop those N-word defensive linemen over there? And of course, that caught me by shock. I was in shock. But here's the good news. Everyone in that huddle that heard that turned to him and said, this is unacceptable. And we kicked him off the team, off the field that day, and subsequently the team got together, voted, and kicked him off the team. So, yeah, it was a shock for me coming from where I grew up to go and hear that sort of language, but from an airman in particular. But it was heartening to me to hear that was an anomaly, and that folks were quick to rally around me and to rally around what the Air Force was about. and that is that the Air Force is a place for everyone, and does not tolerate that sort of language or that sort of discrimination.
From this, obviously the service has made an enormous progress. The entire U.S. military has. Now jobs are open to women that were long closed to women, seen as one of the last civil rights barriers. Gays and lesbians can serve openly in the military now, which is something that, and that there's an overwhelming acceptance and understanding of that at this point, which would not have even been the case, I think, 10 years ago. Do you think that, what more do you think needs to be done to make opportunities for those who are, willing and eager to serve, so that the senior ranks of the service is more representative of the men and women who serve in the military?
Yeah, that's a great question, because one of the things that I wrestled with as the vice chief was diversity, because as you point out, the senior grades within the military, not just the Air Force, don't tend to be very diverse. First of all, point one is, every study that I have read, every book that I have read, shows and proves that a diverse leadership is a strong leadership. So this is not just about we need to have more of this or that in leadership. It's about making the Air Force stronger and better, because you bring more perspective to the table and you bring different experiences to the table. So number one, diversity, having a diverse Air Force is essentially increasing our combat power. That's number one. Number two, though, the topic of diversity is very complex, as you might imagine. Let's take the Air Force as an example. The Air Force tends to have at senior ranks pilots, and nothing wrong with that necessarily, but but a lot of minorities don't tend to go into pilot or operational career fields, and so first of all, you've got a mismatch there of talent as people progress through the ranks. At some point along the way, if you don't, you're going to self-eliminate because you don't have an operational background. Now that has changed somewhat. So all the services, I think, are getting a little more, are accepting that you don't have to be an infantry, or you don't have to be a pilot, or you don't have to be a ship driver. That you can, if you have the talent and you have the capability, you can reach those top grades. The other thing I think is important is we really need to start at a lower level. I mean, folks from airmen, from lieutenants on up, really need to have mentors, need to really understand what it takes to be promoted in the military. So it really, there's a lot of things that need to be done. Those things are being done. I wish they would be done faster. But as an example, I didn't know this until I retired. As folks were preparing my retirement information, they came in and said, "Do you realize that there's only been 8 African-American 4-stars in the history of the Air Force?" I had no idea, but I was shocked by that. And one of the things I tell my own kids when I talk to them about their own workplace is, it bothered me some when I walked down. I was my last tour in the Pentagon, unfortunately, lasted 9 years. But for 9 years, I walked down the halls, Air Force halls, and there was no chief of staff or no secretary of the Air Force that looked like me. And you might say, well, so what? Well, the so what is you've got folks coming into the Air Force looking up at the top, and they would like to, and you have no idea what that does to you, at least in terms of your self-esteem and self-worth. If you're in an organization and you look up at the top and no one looks like you, doesn't mean that the organization is racist. I don't mean to imply that at all. But having my overall point, though, is having a diverse leadership does all sorts of wonders for the organization. And I know the Air Force is working hard to get there, and I applaud them for it.
And obviously a rich history of heroes of all stripe who've served in the nation. Now I want to take you to a topic that is mildly. You are somewhat passionate about the Washington Redskins, and I know that, and I know that you were a football player, and a little bit earlier, the general was telling us exactly how different high school, college, and other coaching methods were than they are today. Yes. More primitive, I think, would have been the word. Now, how do you think the Redskins? What do you think about the last season? What do you think? What are you looking forward to see from this team? This one storied team. I'm a New Yorker, and I've become a Redskins fan living down here.
That's good.
Tell us what you think, because you have been as much a commentator on this, on actual sports shows and not just this one.
Sure. Well, first of all, I am a lifelong Redskin fan. I was born and raised in D.C. I thought the Redskins had a good season last year. There were some good things, some things not as good. I think my personal view is one of the keys is they have to shore up the defense. They were in a lot of games last year that I thought they should have won, but they weren't able to hold on to the lead. They've got some things to work out, obviously. You know, they've got a quarterback signing issue they've got to decide on. They've got several free agents that they've got to decide if they're going to keep them, sign them or not. Then if they don't, what's the plan? We've got a draft coming up, so I think everyone's looking forward to that. There are a lot of free agents on the market that I assume the Redskin leadership are going over as we speak. So I'm optimistic about the future. I think the Redskins have started something a couple of years ago. Sort of 2 years in a row now, they've had a winning record. So I think they're on the cusp of sort of jumping up to be a perennial winner. I think it's a matter of filling in a few key pieces, and I think they'll be there.
And don't you think it's time that the Patriots got knocked off their perch?
Well, you know, unlike a lot of people, I'm not a Patriot hater. I actually think they're a great team and have a great quarterback. But yeah, would I like to see somebody else? Yeah, I'd like to see, but only one else, and that's the Redskins.
But that was an extraordinary performance by that team.
Absolutely.
I mean, at that point, everybody thought it was all over with, and to come
Absolutely.
back from that kind of a deficit proves what a terrific club they are. Sir, thanks very, very much, and we look forward to seeing you in Orlando.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing you as well, and I hope others are there as well also.